started a series a few weeks ago called Girls, Guys, and God. And we've been talking about what it means to have a relationship or be in a relationship and also be a believer. What does the Bible have to say about relationships? We talked about the fact that the world that we live in, Steve, I'm not thinking about this yet, but you should. The world we live in throws us a lot of different signals about what it means to be in a relationship and what it means to have a relationship, what you're allowed to do, what you can't do, that sort of thing. And so we thought last week, we said that if we start talking about this now, we'll probably be in better shape when that day comes. Some of you might be in a relationship right now, so that's not to out you or to at you. But some of you aren't there yet. If you're in 6th grade, you're probably kind of going, I'm not really there yet. But I do think that we are saturated in our culture and in our world with all of these messages about relationships. And so we tiptoed towards it last week. I wanted to get a little bit more specific today. Because I think that today what we're going to talk about has the chance, like it's going to be so important that you understand something that the Apostle Paul said. This is so interesting. The Apostle Paul talked about this 2,000 years ago. And the words that he chose, the words that he used, are perhaps more meaningful today than even then. Which is crazy. Paul is writing to a church that he planted in a place called Corinth. That's where we're going to look at this morning in just a second. He writes a letter to a group of believers. Now listen, because you're going to be like, wow, that sounds a lot like us. He's writing to a group of people who have been called out by God to live differently in a world that's kind of rapidly and aggressively going in the opposite direction. Does that sound familiar? You ever try to follow Jesus in this world, in this culture, in this age? You're watching all your friends do certain things. You're watching culture do certain things. You're watching kind of the tide go in a certain direction. And it feels like Jesus is saying, no, I want you to go the opposite way. And it can be really hard. Well, that wasn't any different back then. This church that Paul, and when I say church, I don't mean building. It's a group of people. Paul writes a letter to them to say, basically, here's how you live out your faith in the middle of a culture that's dead set against it. But this church, this group of people, this environment that they were in was so radically gross compared to like how they were trying to live. In Corinth, like they actually had a temple that was commissioned and dedicated to the goddess of fertility. I'm going to go a little bit deeper with that. I'm going to ask everybody to be kind of mature. They had temple prostitutes, right? They considered it an act of worship to go to the temple and to basically hook up with a temple prostitute. This was not considered weird behavior. This was actually considered good behavior. In their theaters, like they didn't have movies, of course, but they had like, not operas, but like musical stuff like that. Their theaters, they had drama back then. Their theaters, they had a reserved seating section for the temple prostitutes. They actually revered this group of people, right? Like when we think of that today, we kind of go, oh, that's gross, oh, that's despicable. Not back then. They actually thought this was actually remarkable. We should honor these people, right? So you can imagine being a Christian in the middle of that kind of environment, trying to live a little bit differently. And Paul goes, listen, I know that all of culture is doing this. Here's how I'm saying you should live. And it's so important that we get this today, because the same is true of us today. We said this last week. Like there's all these messages that are being given to us by culture about what's allowed and what isn't allowed. And one of the things that I look back and I go, I wish somebody had told me this when I was around your age. And that's what we're going to share this morning, that we need a guardrail. We talked about this last week, if you remember. We need a guardrail in this area of our life. You guys know what guardrails are? You guys know, like on the side of the highway, side of the road, like these guardrails, that the goal of a guardrail is that basically it protects you from like really bad danger, right? Like if you drive your car up against a guardrail and it hurts, but it keeps you from worse pain later. Does that make sense? And so we put up guardrails in different areas of our lives. And one of the guardrails that the Apostle Paul, we talked about that last year, we can return to it later this year if you guys want to. But one of the areas where Paul says we really need a guardrail is around the area of our relationships. Because we live in a world, we said this last week, and I want to go a little bit further with this. We live in a world that will bait you to the edge of danger and then laugh at you when you fall over that edge. I want to say that again. We live in a world that baits you to the edge of danger. Says get as close to the line as you can. Take as much risk as you can. Get away with as much as possible. And don't go over the line, but then once you go over the line, all of the world mocks you. We've seen this with celebrities before, right? Different recording artists, and I'm not gonna talk about anyone in particular, but they'll write songs about partying with their friends or getting drunk or getting high. Like, I mean, even we kind of go country music is safe, and I make a lot of jokes about country music, but that's a big part of country music. I mean, everything, even mild stuff, right? It's all about that same thing, and we go, oh, it's just good fun. Oh, it's just good fun, and then one of them gets arrested and then gets a mugshot, and you see it in the newspaper or online, and we all laugh at it. We're like, ha 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 ha. They went over the edge. They went too far. We see this, we gossip about people who like end up in a relationship that you're like, they shouldn't be in that relationship, they shouldn't be in that relationship, or whatever. And then something happens in the relationship, and it's like they fall over the edge, and we as a culture mock them. We think it's okay to get away with as much as we can. You guys follow me here? We can get away as much as you can with as much as you can, but just don't fall over the edge. We're always asking, I don't know if you've ever asked this, what's wrong with it? Or how far can I go and not hit danger, right? Some of us, and it doesn't necessarily just apply to our relationships, it's a lot of areas of our lives. We want to go to the party, but not partake or not participate. We're like, well, I can go and just watch, or I can be there but not do. Like, we're always trying to, where is the line and how close can I get to it without messing myself up? And the Apostle Paul, and it's a bunch of different areas of our lives where we do this. Some of you might do this with music. You're like, well, I listen to it, but I don't care about the words. And it's like, but those messages are going somewhere. We watch movies and you're like, well, I see people shooting each other up, but it's not creating any kind of impulses in me. The truth is, it might be. Video games the same way, right? We're always getting as close to the line as we can. And Paul goes, when it comes to your relationships, this is so important. When it comes to your relationships, don't do that. He says this in 1 Corinthians. He says, flee from sexual immorality. Flee. I know that's like, okay, we don't use the word flee a lot anymore, right? You probably this week did not yell at a friend like, flee! Like, flee! Get out! Flee! Like, we don't say that, right? But I love this word for this verse. Flee. Run from it. Get away from it. Don't get as close to, when it comes to sexual immorality, he goes, get as far away from it as quickly as you can. Like, don't flirt with it. We live in a culture that says flirt with it. Get close to the line, mess around with it, maybe go on certain websites, it's okay, there's no big, like there's all these things. Maybe when it comes to, not just the websites, but I know that like a big thing right now is like Snapchat, and you can ask for things, like all these different gross things where we tiptoe towards the line. I've had students, again, I've had students that kind of go, well, what's wrong with following a certain account? Like, there's no, like, yeah, the images they're bad, but they're not that bad. And all these things where we kind of go, well, we're getting close to the line, but we're not crossing the line. And the Apostle Paul goes, you're asking the wrong question. He goes, don't ask where is the line. He goes, run the other way. Run the other way. If you're watching a movie, and it makes you uncomfortable. He goes, don't even entertain that. Just run from it. If you're on a website, if you've got an app on your phone, if you're following an account, he says, don't kind of go, what's wrong with it, or how much can I look, or whatever. He goes, just get rid of it altogether. Remember what Jesus said last week in Matthew chapter 5? We talked about that. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. If your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out. Remember he said, better to lose a body part than an entire person in the fire of hell. Is what he says. He goes, don't ask how close can I get to the line. Because the way that temptation works is that we get really close to the line, and at some point you're going to keep going further and further and further, and you're going to cross over that line and fall off a cliff, and then everybody is going to mock you. That's the world that we live in. Not us, of course, but the culture. He says, when it comes to your sexual identity, when it comes to the choices that you make in relationships, and not just relationships with each other, but just the accounts you choose to follow right now, the things you choose to do, the messages that you see. I mean, there's a whole list of areas besides just going on a date. But it includes them. Just follow. Like, there's so much out there. The music you listen to, the movies you watch, all of that. He goes, don't ask where's the line and how close can I get to it. He says, actually flee from it. Flee from it. And culture is beginning to catch up. This is so remarkable, with something that the Apostle Paul said 2,000 years ago. We're beginning to see this in science and in studies and in counseling. And he goes, all other sins a person commits are outside of the body. But whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. We are, and I'm just going to go here for a second. Everybody seems like you're able to handle this conversation. I thank you for being so mature. He says all other sins are outside of the body, but when it comes to sexual sin, he hones in on that one. Because we live in a culture, they did back then too, that says, you know what, it's not who you are. It's a part of who you are. It's an appetite. If you're hungry, you feed your appetite, right? He goes, there's no other, nothing else bad is going to happen to you. Like, if you it's just, maybe call it sexual integrity or purity, or he says it's just that. Like, it's just physical. It's just physical. And the Apostle Paul goes, oh, no, it's not. Culture might say it's just physical, but we're just beginning to learn that it's not just physical. Like, when you cross a certain line physically, something it affects you. We see this. But we would love to believe that it's just physical. But Paul goes, no, it stays with his, when you sin sexually, like when you cross a line, because it leads this kind of this burden and excitement. It's just different. And so he goes, don't mess with it. Just don't try to get as close to as you can. He says, actually flee from it. Move in the opposite direction. And so this might mean taking some radical steps or some radical steps, some big ones, where you kind of go, you know what? And we said this last week, if my phone is causing me to stumble, I need to get rid of it. If I can't be trusted with. If this person, and I think, and just to get real specific, and I know it's a big spread in ages in here, but I think it's important we talk about it. Because a lot of you guys, raise your hand if you have a phone. Yeah, okay. So I don't mind telling you guys this. My son is in 5th grade. He's going to be in middle school very shortly. And he told me the other day, he goes, Dad, everyone in my class, and this isn't true by the way, everyone in my class has a phone but me. And he said it in front of his mom. And she goes, when you start driving, maybe then we'll talk about it, right? Because it's so much rope to hang yourself with. There's a lot of freedom there. And I know you guys have probably got some really great safeguards, some really great boundaries mapped out. If you don't, I highly recommend doing that. Putting some guardrails in place when it comes to what you can do and where you can go and what you can look at on there. Does that make sense? And just putting some, and I just think some very practical ones. There's all sorts of tools out there that'll keep you from making mistakes, because the gravitational pull of our human nature is always going to be towards sin, towards the edge of that cliff. Does that make sense? We're always going to be flirting with sexual immorality. Paul says, flee from it. Flee from it. And in today's day and age, like it's almost like it's impossible to exist and not have a phone at your fingertips, right? I mean, it's just the day and age that we live with, or live in. And so that's not going to change. So maybe what needs to change is how we use it and what kind of guardrails we put in place. Guys, it's not just guys, but guys, if you don't have a place where you lock up your phone at the end of the day, I highly recommend doing that. I think that should be a guardrail. It's just a very practical. You should never go to bed with your phone. It's just, there's nothing good that can happen from it. At best, it keeps you awake. All that blue light, you're tempted and you're not going to get any sleep, right? At worst, I think you know where that goes. Just put it up. Put it up. Can I lean in a little bit further? Can I make everybody a little uncomfortable? I wasn't planning on saying this, but I'm going to go for it. I don't think there's ever a good reason to ask for pictures. Y'all know what I mean by that?
Yes.
I don't think there's ever a good reason to ask for pictures or to send pictures. I know Snapchat, you send, the goofy ones. They'll send me some of those, and they're real funny. I've got this great impression of Ace's dad because of the beard and stuff. Okay. But when people start asking you for pictures, I don't think there's ever a good reason to say. Guys, there is never a good reason to ask for pictures. I think that should just be a guardrail. If I ever find myself asking for a picture, I'm going to go, flee. I don't need it. If I ever find myself, ladies, being asked for a picture, flee. No. Just not going to do it. I think if we set up some of those guardrails now, that's so much easier than if we get into a bad situation later and try to work back from it. So how many are we up to? Don't take your phone to bed with you. Don't send pictures. Don't ask for pictures. And I don't mean like bad, I just mean any, you know. Now, does that mean like Snapchat, like if Brooke wants to message Macy over here, you know, like a goofy picture, that's not what I'm saying. But if someone, I don't want to use Macy as an example, but if someone were to say, will you send me a picture? That's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? You guys got me on that? Okay. All right. What other guardrails do we need? Am I missing any? If you ever go on a date, can I say this? Don't ever be alone with your date. Period. Go to a restaurant. Is anybody in the room dating? You know what? Don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. Because let's just assume you're not yet, but you will be one day. So ladies, I want you to hear this now. As a dad who has 2 daughters and loves his girls, stay inside of other people. Why not? Nothing bad can happen if you stay in public view. Well, for the most part. Go to dinner, at a restaurant. If you go to the movies, go with a group of friends. A movie is a bad date. Can I say that? Go to see a movie is a bad date because you just look at a big rectangle for 2 hours and then you leave. Like you don't get to talk, you don't get to know each other, and there's only bad things that can happen, right? If you're not watching the movie. I just always tell guys, I'm like, movies are just bad dates. Like, don't think you're making a movie, right? Don't be alone. Stay in public eye. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to kind of flirt with immorality. Flee from it. Go play putt-putt. Maybe as we head back, just keep thinking about this. What guardrails do I want to put in place so that I protect my integrity? I love the word integrity. I want to protect my integrity. Because if something violates that, then your integrity is in question. We don't want that to happen. So what guardrails am I going to put in place to protect my integrity? Make sure I flee from something that is just so tempting and alluring, like towards the edge of the cliff. Can we all commit to putting some guardrails in place? Is that something? Can I get some nods here? You don't have to commit right now. But I just think you should. Map these out. Think for yourself. What guardrails am I going to put in place that's going to keep you from violating something that could end up being so destructive? So destructive. Let me pray for you, Lord. Lord Jesus, thank you for this message. Thank you that 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul wrote something that we would get so much out of. It's just one verse that we get so much out of today. 2,000 years later, the wisdom in this one verse, Lord, if we can put this into practice, that you'll save us a whole lot of regret, a whole lot of damage, a whole lot of hurt. So, Father, I know that it's a goofy thing to talk about. It's a little bit awkward, but it's so important, Lord, because we live in a world that is a lot like the one the Apostle Paul lived in, where culture is moving in a direction, and you've asked us to move in the opposite direction. And it's not going to happen on its own. It only happens when we are proactive, when we are working, when we are meticulous, when we are focused, Lord. And so I pray that you would help us put on the full armor, and go to battle, ready and armed and proactive, not reactive, Lord. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So as we navigate this strange new world with phones and dating and all that crazy stuff, Lord, that's on the horizon, I just pray that you help us to navigate it well. That your Spirit would be alive inside of us, and it would sensitize us, and it would remind us when we are in a danger zone to flee, not to flirt. To flee, not to flirt. We love you, Jesus. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.